They told him to feed his people first. It was meant as an insult. Western governments, international financial institutions, foreign policy analysts, when they ran out of other arguments against Ibrahim Traoré's refusal to follow the old rules, they fell back on this one. Feed your people first, then we will talk about sovereignty. It was a trap disguised as advice, because the entire system they were defending was the reason the people were hungry in the first place. But Traoré did not argue. He did not hold a press conference. He did not write a letter to the United Nations. He went to the fields. And in April 2026, less than 4 years after taking power, Burkina Faso announced that it had halted all rice imports from abroad. Completely, a nation that was importing 70% of its rice is now feeding itself. The world that told him to feed his people first went very quiet. This is the story of how he silenced them. Welcome. This is Arisen Now. It was not an inevitable consequence of the Sahelian climate. It was not proof that the country was simply too poor, too dry, or too underdeveloped to feed itself. It was the result of a system that was deliberately designed to prevent exactly that. Here is how the system worked. Burkina Faso sits on approximately 500,000 hectares of highly developable lowland agricultural territory. For decades, under successive governments that operated within the framework of French post-colonial economic management, less than 10% of that land was ever cultivated. The infrastructure to irrigate it was never built. The roads to reach it were never paved. The processing facilities to handle what it produced were never constructed. And every time a Burkina government needed to build any of those things, the process was the same. Apply for a World Bank loan, accept the conditions, award the contract to a foreign firm, watch the money flow back out of the country through profit margins, consulting fees, and equipment imports. Walk away with a fraction of what was promised, and a debt that would take a generation to repay. Meanwhile, Burkina Faso was exporting raw gold and raw cotton at commodity prices while importing processed food at consumer prices. The gap between what left the country and what came back in was the hunger. 80% of the population worked in agriculture, and yet the country was a net importer of basic survival food. 80% of the people farming, and still not enough food. That is not geography. That is architecture. An architecture of dependency built over 60 years and maintained by the very institutions that stood up and told Traoré to feed his people first. September 30th, 2022, Ibrahim Traoré took power, and he did something unexpected. He took the advice, feed your people first. Fine. He launched the agropastoral and fisheries offensive, a nearly $1 billion national food production initiative funded entirely from Burkina Faso's own redirected gold revenues. No IMF loan, no World Bank condition, no foreign agricultural development grant. His own gold, his own plan, his own people. The scale of the initial deployment was overwhelming. 400 tractors handed directly to farmers, free of charge, 239 power tillers, free. Over 700 water pumps, free. 64,000 hectares targeted for immediate cultivation, 69,000 tons of fertilizer distributed across the country, 18,000 tons of improved hybrid seeds delivered to farming communities. And Traoré confirmed this himself, standing before the farmers and saying it plainly. These tractors will be used to plow your land for free. The objective is to truly achieve food self-sufficiency. This was just the first wave. In May 2025, he escalated. 608 more tractors, another round of equipment valued at nearly $180 million. By then, the total investment in farm equipment alone had crossed $300 million. All free, all from nationalized gold revenue, all delivered without a single condition attached. When a U.S. general went on camera to publicly complain that Burkina Faso was misusing its gold reserves, describing free tractors given to farmers as a threat to stability, Traoré did not respond. He sent more tractors. Machinery without water is just metal in the sun. And Traoré understood that the real revolution was not the tractors, it was the water. Burkina Faso does not lack water entirely. It has rivers, it has seasonal rainfall, it has massive dam reservoirs holding billions of cubic meters. The problem was always distribution. The rain fell in the south, the hunger lived in the north, and nothing connected them. For 60 years, that gap was treated as a fact of life. Traoré treated it as an engineering problem. He revived dormant irrigation zones. He built new ones. He redirected state capital into water infrastructure with an urgency that had never been seen before. The Douro perimeter, less than 100 miles from the brutal edge of the Sahara, now runs on a solar-powered pumping station, delivering 9,720 cubic meters of water every single hour. 800 hectares completely underwater. Rice growing in the desert. The Burkina Growth Pole, 245 kilometers southeast of the capital, harnesses a 1.7 billion cubic meter reservoir on the White Volta River. Gravity-fed canals, solar pumps, automated irrigation, laser land leveling, satellite monitoring, IoT sensors, optimizing every single drop. In 2025 alone, Bagre produced nearly 12,000 tons of rice. The DA perimeter in the Nord region, sitting right against the Sahara's edge, covers 2,240 hectares of irrigated land using Archimedean screw pumps to lift water from the Serba River into a gravity-fed canal network. Yields there have exploded. Farmers are reporting incomes 177% higher than rain-fed farming. 177%. Not because they worked harder, because they finally had water. The Sum Dam in Nanaro, completed by early 2025, now waters over 1,000 hectares of previously scorched earth, pumping out 7,500 tons of rice and 2,500 tons of maize every single year. And in places like Bonzasan, modern irrigation is pulling 6 tons of rice per hectare where nothing grew before. The desert is not a limit. It was always a plumbing problem. But perhaps the most symbolic victory in this entire food revolution is the one that experts said was biologically impossible: wheat. For generations, Western agronomists told African governments with scientific authority that growing wheat in the Sahel was climatically impossible. The temperatures were too extreme, the rainfall too erratic, the soil chemistry wrong. This expert consensus conveniently forced Burkina Faso to spend $75 million every single year importing 193,000 tons of wheat, mostly from France and Poland. $75 million per year. To make bread in a country with farmland. Traoré launched a domestic wheat experiment in 2023 with 125 hectares. 125 hectares against 60 years of expert opinion. It worked. By 2024, the government scaled to 1,342 hectares, yielding nearly 2,600 tons of domestic wheat straight from Burkinabe soil. Golden wheat fields swaying in the Burkinabe wind, where the experts said nothing could grow, and to make sure the country never had to beg foreign seed companies again, a 5,000-hectare wheat seed production bank was launched. Sovereignty over seeds means sovereignty over the next harvest, and the harvest after that, and every harvest forever. The Minofa wheat milling factory responded to all of this by tripling its capacity from 9,000 tons to 32,000 tons annually, 150 tons per day, and expanding further. Wheat grown in Burkina Faso, milled in Burkina Faso, into flour that feeds Burkina Faso, $75 million per year staying home. But the food revolution required more than water and seeds. It required people, at scale. Immediately, and Traoré found them in the most unexpected place: the military. Every single military base in Burkina Faso is now under strict executive orders to produce its own food. Soldiers growing their own rations. Military land used for crops and livestock. The armed forces cutting their own drain on the civilian food budget. It sounds radical. It was genius. When the Presidential Initiative for Agriculture rolled out, over 3,000 military personnel, including combat engineers and the VDP civilian militia, were deployed directly alongside 4,000 internally displaced persons. Together, they cleared, plowed, and harvested over 11,000 hectares of strategic agricultural land. Military bulldozers and excavators, the same machines designed for combat engineering, were redirected to terraform and cultivate land at a scale that civilian farmers could never achieve alone. And because terrorist groups in the Sahel had spent years weaponizing hunger, blockading villages, preventing farmers from reaching their fields, destroying harvests as a tactic of war, Traoré's response was as elegant as it was ruthless. He gave every farming community an armed escort, permanently. The VDP militia operates under what commanders call a dual mandate: the rifle and the plow. They secure the perimeter. Then they get down in the dirt and plant seeds themselves. As of April 2026, over 4,600 of these agricultural VDPs, including hundreds of women, have graduated from a training program fusing agronomic science with military discipline. Fighting terrorism by planting seeds. The insurgents tried to use hunger as a weapon. Traoré turned hunger into a battleground and won it. The mobilization did not stop with soldiers. Traoré looked at every single institution in Burkina Faso and asked the same question: What are you doing to feed this nation? Agricultural engineers who had spent careers in air-conditioned offices in Ouagadougou were transferred directly into rural farming cooperatives. The government provided motorbikes so they could reach the most remote communities. Universities were ordered to step away from lecture halls and into the fields. Public institutions, government ministries, all of them redirected. And then Traoré walked into a prison. The Baporo Penitentiary Center was transformed. Inmates now receive agricultural training. They learn to grow crops with modern farming tools. The result: a 40-hectare cornfield cultivated by inmates in the middle of a dry area. 40 hectares of corn. From a prison. Not a single institution was allowed to be passive. Not the military, not the universities, not the engineers, not the prisoners. Every available human resource in Burkina Faso was turned into a builder of the nation's food supply. And the results arrived with a speed that stunned even the most optimistic observers. Now let's speak in the only language the critics understand: numbers. Burkina Faso produced 6 million tons of cereals. 6 million tons. More than enough for the entire domestic population of 22 million people. A country that was importing 70% of its rice produced enough cereals to feed itself completely in less than 2 years of the agropastoral offensive. And that does not even count the fruits, the vegetables, the livestock production, or the fish farming. Farmers in Banzasson are pulling 6 tons of rice per hectare from irrigated land. Potato harvests are reaching 35 tons per hectare in the middle of Sahelian heat. Transport trucks are literally overflowing as farmers unload maize harvests that would have been unthinkable 3 years ago. The projections for the 2025 to 2026 season are monumental. 2.68 million tons of maize, 2.4 million tons of sorghum, over 1 million tons of paddy rice, 1.1 million tons of millet, total cereal production pushing past 6 million tons. Again, consistently, and because the irrigation infrastructure allows for dry season farming, Burkina farmers are no longer waiting for the rainy season. They are harvesting rice and maize twice a year, effectively doubling the agricultural calendar without adding a single hectare of new land. Then came April 2026. All rice imports halted. The country that was told to feed its people first fed its people. And then it stopped buying food from the countries that gave the advice. But the food revolution did not stop at survival crops. Because Traoré understood something deeper than calories: the psychological dimension of food sovereignty. When you can grow what everyone said you could not grow, in a place where everyone said it was impossible, you prove something that goes far beyond agriculture. You prove that the limits were never yours. They were imposed on you. And so Burkina Faso started growing apples in the Sahara. The government's agricultural demonstration farms, set up specifically to prove that the desert is just a mindset, planted apple trees, coffee plants, cocoa seedlings, and strawberries. A local farmer at one of these centers explained it on camera. For decades, people believed cultivating apples, coffee, and cocoa was geographically impossible in Burkina Faso. That is what we are trying to change. To show the world that it is possible. They started with 2 apple trees. 2 trees against 60 years of expert consensus. And beside those trees, cocoa plants are thriving after just 3 months of precise irrigation. Strawberries are growing in dry heat that agronomists said would kill them. Coffee is being cultivated in a country that was never supposed to produce coffee. The Anana Faso pineapple project spans 23 hectares in the middle of arid landscape, producing some of the largest, sweetest pineapples you will ever see. Each pineapple individually wrapped in a paper bag labeled Ananas Faso to protect it from the harsh Sahelian sun. And these pineapples are not shipped raw to be processed elsewhere. They go directly to local facilities like Afridia Industries, where Burkina workers turn them into high-value juices and concentrates on national soil. The old climate maps are being rewritten. 1 strawberry, 1 apple tree, 1 pineapple farm at a time. Here is what separates all of this from every other African development promise you have ever heard. The president shows up, not to cut a ribbon, not to give a speech in a suit at a ceremony designed for foreign cameras. Ibrahim Traoré shows up in military fatigues, walking through thick brush in tomato farms, physically picking up heavy sacks of fresh tomatoes, and talking directly to the farmers whose hands feed the nation. He personally inspected the optical sorting machines at the Kamsala rice facility. He touched the cans at the tomato processing plant inauguration. He stood in front of VDP agricultural graduates and told them they were fighting terrorism by planting seeds. He visited the Baporo prison and refused to leave it as a colonial holding cell. He sent his engineers out of the capital on motorbikes to reach farmers in the most remote villages. This level of personal engagement is not a performance. It is a signal to every single institution, every single official, every single citizen. Nobody gets to watch from the sidelines. Not the ministers, not the engineers, not the soldiers, not the president. Everyone farms, and that signal, transmitted downward through every layer of Burkinabe society, is what makes this revolution different. An 80-year-old grandmother heard about it on television and drove to a construction site with 2 bags of cement she bought with her own savings. Students showed up during school breaks to help build roads. Children molded pavement bricks with joy on their faces. When the head of state is in the tomato field, the grandmother brings cement. That is the energy of a nation that has decided to build itself. They said, "Feed your people first." And he did. 6 million tons of cereals in 20. All rice imports halted in April 2026. Wheat growing in a country where wheat was declared impossible. Apples growing in the Sahara. Strawberries in the desert heat. 300,000 tons of tomatoes now being canned in Burkinabe factories instead of rotting by the roadside. Brazilian cattle genetics injecting 1.2 million liters of fresh milk into a sovereign dairy network. A domestically engineered chicken breed replacing all French and Belgian broiler imports. 180 floating fish cages producing tilapia in landlocked desert reservoirs. 400 tractors given free. Then 600 more. Then $300 million total in farm equipment. All free, all from nationalized gold. Solar-powered irrigation systems pumping nearly 10,000 cubic meters of water per hour in the middle of the Sahara. Soldiers farming, engineers in the villages, prisoners growing corn, a president in the tomato fields, and a billion-dollar canal being designed to connect the great reservoirs and irrigate millions more hectares, turning the Sahel into what the Nile is for Egypt. They said, "Feed your people first." He fed them, and when the silence came, the silence of critics who had run out of objections, it was not a quiet silence. It was the silence of 6 million tons of grain sitting in Burkinabe storage. It was the silence of Asian rice ships that no longer needed to dock. It was the silence of the $75 million per year that used to flow to French wheat exporters and is now staying inside Burkina Faso. That is what silencing the world sounds like. Not a speech, not a protest, not a press release. A harvest, the largest in Burkinabe history. Grown on Burkinabe soil, watered by Burkinabe rivers, harvested by Burkinabe hands, processed in Burkinabe factories, eaten by Burkinabe children. They said, "Feed your people first." He did. Now what? This is arisen now. The silence did not last long. Because Traoré was not finished. Feeding the nation was not the destination. It was the foundation. The foundation for everything that comes next. And what comes next is a transformation so ambitious that even the people who have watched everything Burkina Faso has already accomplished are struggling to believe it. Start with the canal, the billion-dollar waterway that will link the great reservoirs of Burkina Faso, Bagré, Ziga, Samandeni, into a single unified water artery moving from the humid south to the dying north. If executed, this canal will supply irrigation water to millions of hectares of farmland that currently produce nothing. It will create a permanent agricultural corridor through the heart of the Sahel. It will transform the drought cycle that has defined this region for generations into a manageable engineering variable rather than an existential threat. And with Mali and Niger, fellow members of the Alliance of Sahel States, potentially joining the project, this canal could become a transnational water network that makes the entire Western Sahel agriculturally viable. The greatest terraforming achievement in African history, built without the IMF, built without the World Bank, built by Burkinabe military engineers in partnership with Malian and Nigerian counterparts. But the canal is only the most dramatic piece of what is being constructed. Consider what is happening in the protein sector.